think last time we ended up discussing monotheism and paganism and a number of those concepts, spirituality versus religion, and so on. And, we are presented at the present time in our history that, we have three monotheistic religions that are supposed to be the more or less absolute truth relative to God, our divine origin, if you will. And, that everything else is primitive, is pagan, it's fetish, and a number of other derogative terms. And yet still, I think we can probably trace these monotheistic, so-called monotheistic religions back to their origin in Kemet. I think one of the things that we may do is to ask you as a historian, can you place the Jewish people or the Israelites or the Hebrews, or is there a difference between these three? Can you place them in Egypt? And what period of time would that be in terms of their arrival, in terms of their stay there, and then in terms of their exodus? Can you help us there? Because it seems to be a bit of a quagmire.
Here's the problem. I tried writing a history of Judaism. And here's the problem. Every single fact that you could possibly imagine is controversial. And when it comes to trying to use the Tanakh, their holy scrolls, as a way of tracing them, every fact is controversial. There isn't a fact that we can say, yes, this is what happened. So the stories begin with Abraham in the city of Ur, and Ur is in Sumer. Now, the Sumerians are the people of ancient Iraq, where Iraq is today. They're not Arabs. They were originally black folks. Does that mean that Abraham was one of them? We don't know. Did Abraham even exist? We don't know. Then we have the story that Abraham's people went west from Sumer to Canaan. And in the land of Canaan, Canaan is where Israel / Palestine / Lebanon is today. In that land, they mixed with the Hittites and some other populations. The Hittites are thought to be white. Is that what happened? And then from there, they are said to have entered Egypt. Ancient Egypt during this period was definitely Black African. Did that happen? All of these things are controversial. And in Egypt, their numbers allegedly went from 70 people up to 430,000 men, not including priests. We have no figure for the number of women. We have no figure for the number of children. Professor Finch says that's 2 million people. And if 70 people enter a country and 2 million leave, those 2 million would have been Black Africans, surely. But did that happen? And all of these facts are controversial. So there is the only hard evidence that I consider to be hard evidence is one of the ancient Jewish temples has been found by archaeologists. And what was found was on Elephantine Island. And Elephantine Island is the boundary between ancient Egypt and ancient Nubia. And that means that whoever built the temple on Elephantine Island, they would have been Black Africans. And that's the only solid evidence that I think would definitely stand up in court if we wanted to trace the ancient people that call themselves Israelites or Jews or Hebrews or whatever.
Now, how do you know that that temple is a Jewish temple on Elephantine Island?
Oh, the archaeologists say so. So it's not me saying this. This isn't me. The archaeological report came out, I think, in 1911.
Mm.
And it was reported on by a scholar called the Reverend A.H. Sayce, S-A-Y-C-E. And what's more is the temple, there's certainly, it's called the Temple of Yahu. Yahu is to be the same as Yahweh. And it's built using the same technology as the Egyptian temple of, I think it's Khnum, which is next door to it. And therefore, it was indigenous Africans that built both. So the Reverend A.H. Sayce. And it's really, really interesting because so few Black scholars seem to know about the Temple of Yahu on Elephantine Island. And I think that that is very, very strong evidence that everyone should be talking about, in my opinion.
Well, I'm glad you're talking about it because I didn't know about it. You know, what I knew about, I think it's Elephantine Island or further, shall we say, south into Ethiopia, is that the what was it called? Oh my goodness, that Solomon's son with Sheba.
Menelik.
Yeah, and he took the I think he took it to Elephantine Island, didn't he? The well, what is it they used to worship and they would carry it?
Yeah, the Ark of the Covenant.
The Ark of the Covenant. There you go. Thank you. You know, the old brain here isn't what it used to be. Yeah, he took the Ark of the Covenant and then took it to, of course, Ethiopia. And there's some weird there where there's this who was the author that was looking for this, and he followed the trail through Elephantine Island, and it supposedly it ended up in Ethiopia. And I've actually visited the place where it is, where it's housed in Ethiopia, although they won't let you in, obviously, because it's sacred and it's guarded by an Ethiopian priest, you know, with his life. He stays there all his life and so on and so forth. So that would give credence, I would say, to that particular story. You know, and then following up on that would be the so-called Falasha Jews, whose practice I think is really ancient Judaism as far as, I don't know, I think the current rabbis say, and it predates, shall we say, the Jerusalem type of worship, and therefore is original. And many of those Jews, as you know, have been transported to Israel and so on and so forth. And that's how they're treated in Israel, maybe another story for another time. But the fact is that they exist in Ethiopia. And I'm sure there's still some there. Not all of them have been airlifted to Israel, but that gives credence to that whole business of, shall we say, Hebrews or authentic African Hebrew people before there was what the Exodus, whatever that was, and if the Exodus itself, you know, really happened. Because again, well, I just want to mention one thing that I seem to recall, that when Akhenaten came to the throne and he was the heretic Pharaoh, he brought in, some people say he brought in monotheism, but he didn't really bring in monotheism. He brought in atonism, which is the worship of the sun as an entity. So this was a reversion from a spiritual God to a God who was a thing. And from my perspective, and I think also from the original Kemetic perspective, you know, he was a renegade in that sense, but he attempted to destroy the temples of Amun, and many of the priests went to Ethiopia, as I recall, historically. Was that a historical fact?
It's possible. It's possible.
Okay.
But let me throw in a couple. Yeah. I have come across some Israeli news articles, and there's an Israeli newspaper called Jewish World, and they have an article called Ethiopian Judaism, nearly identical to that practiced during Second Temple period. And I have another Israeli paper called breakingisraelnews.com. And it's the same headline, Ethiopian Judaism, nearly identical to Second Temple practice. And so the oldest form of Judaism practiced in the modern world is the Ethiopian Jewish practice. And similarly, you mentioned a scholar tracing the Ark of the Covenant. There was a TV documentary by a London scholar called Tudor Parfit. And he tries the theory of Ethiopia, but he also explores other theories that the Ark of the Covenant, if it ever existed, could have ended up in Southern Africa. And the result of his research is that some of the Black peoples of Southern Africa, such as the Lemba, have been found to have certain genetic traits, and these genetic traits are said to connect the Lemba to other Jews around the world. And there's this story going around that geneticists are using that you can trace certainly elite Jews to a particular set of genetic markers. And the Lemba have a higher proportion of that genetic marker than European Jews. And again, I think that's an interesting area of research. Again, no Black scholars are doing this research. This is what Tudor Parfit and his people are coming.
Yeah, I think I've also heard of that one. I think it's related to the Cohens or the Levites or something that was the priestly class in terms of the ancient Hebrew people. So there are definitely significant connections there, and we probably won't go further into it, but maybe not this time, but we will stick a pin in it and get back to it later on as we go into African religions. But certainly we also know that the Yoruba, or at least some people, think that the Yoruba trace their origins to Kemet, and many of their rituals, shall we say, are considered to be similar to the Jewish rituals, So, you know, there's that connection, not just to Southern Africa, but to Western Africa, as well as obviously Northeast Africa. But that seems to be in the background in some sense, as everything became Europeanized. But, you know, another thing that's also very significant in terms of whether or not there's any fact to Abraham and so on, and there's a lot of evidence that suggests that it's not fact. But all of this greatness of King David and Solomon in terms of their building and the temples that they had in Jerusalem, et cetera, in ancient Israel, there's been no archaeological evidence of any of that. Now, you know, supposedly Solomon was so rich, and he had I don't know, 1,000 concubines and, you know, some other wives and so on, other than Sheba. But there's no evidence. I mean, there's no artwork, there are no goblets, there are no artifacts to be found anywhere. There are no building sites anywhere. And
can I jump in?
My conclusion, I just want to say my conclusion from that is that there's a borrowing of Egyptian history. That these folks who at some time were in Egypt learned everything from Egypt, just like Moses did. I mean, we're going to get back to Moses, I'm sure, and then took it as their own history because they were in Egypt for a certain period of time. You know, and to me that makes a lot of sense in terms of trying to put together this biblical stuff, which again, a lot of it is myth, but the cursing, the period that they lived in Egypt, the cursing of Egypt, but yet still the appropriation of all of this wonderful mythos that is clearly Egyptian. I'm sorry I ran off there at the mouth, but go ahead and say your speech.
Yeah, what I was going to say was, again, just to strengthen your point,
Mhm.
I came across a 2002 article called "As Rabbis Face Facts, Bible Tales Are Wilting." So you've now got in America the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism
Mhm.
issuing a new commentary on the Tanakh, which they're calling Etz Hayim, the Tree of Life, where they are more or less saying, let me read it. Abraham, the Jewish patriarch, probably never existed, nor did Moses. The
Mhm.
entire Exodus stories recounted in the Bible probably never occurred. The same is true of the tumbling of the walls of Jericho. So they're going, essentially knocking all of that stuff down.
Mhm.
And that raises the question, if a lot of this stuff isn't historically substantiated,
Mhm.
then what really is in the Tanakh? And is it possible?
Greetings, I'm Robin Walker of The Black Secret. Keen to popularize Pan-African heritage, we have two products that should interest you. We are giving away an introductory free book called 100 Black History Facts. Click here to claim your free book. Secondly, our online course, The Black Secret, has 55 hours of filmed content. You will systematically learn every major theme in our history, going all the way back. Click here for more information.
That a lot of the material really was lifted from other sources. And were those other sources the ancient Egyptians, and for that matter, the Sumerians? And there is some evidence that there is. And we have to shout out the late Professor Youssef Ben Yochanan,
Mhm.
who pointed out that Proverbs 22,
Mhm.
the Tanakh, is really a rewrite of a book called The Instructions of Amenemope.
Mhm.
And it appears to be word for word, passage for passage for passage. And that's not the only example where stuff just got lifted wholesale. They didn't even change it up particularly much.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah,
And similarly,
yeah, go ahead.
people have noticed that Psalms 104, attributed to King David, appears to be word for word the hymn to Aten, written by Pharaoh Akhenaten. If it wasn't written by him, it was written during the time of Pharaoh Akhenaten. Again, word for word.
Mhm.
And so people then raise some questions. How many more stories in the Tanakh really are stories that people just lifted
Mhm.
and dumped into the Tanakh scrolls?
I think if you look at Genesis too, I mean Genesis is really simply a takeoff, shall we say, on what was taught at Hermopolis, in terms of the primeval new, the waters, out of which everything came, and then God saying, "Let there be light." I mean, light is obviously Ra or Atum Ra, and out of this, then came, all creation. And so that there's a lot of evidence, as you're saying, or I should say there's lack of evidence. There's evidence that there's lack of evidence of the historical validity of most of what is written in terms of the Old Testament as historical fact, coming down, from Abraham to all of this, the glory of the Israelites, etc. And it seems to me a lot of it has to do, I guess we'll see that as we look at Christianity, with the change, shall we say, from the understanding of myth as a way of expressing reality that cannot be expressed in words, and going to an anthropomorphic misunderstanding of myth, and treating it as historical reality, as opposed to a myth that's trying to tell you something else in terms of symbolism. And I think you see that wholesale, I think, in terms of what we're discussing here, because you can't find archaeological evidence, for any of this stuff that's supposedly ancient Jewish history going all the way back to Abraham. If you can't find that, and up to the glorification of Israel in its golden age, there's just no evidence for that. And then so many of the other stories are preposterous, like you mentioned, the exodus of what, 2 million people or something like that. But there's no record of it anywhere historically. And we get to the same thing. Where's the historical record of Jesus? I mean, a man who was supposed to have, man or divinity who was supposed to have come among us and performed miracles all over the place, and yet still there's no historical record. Nobody at the time, when BC and AC happened, nobody has a historical record of them. So I think we have the same thing happening, that it's myth, and then you have a group of people, I don't know why, and maybe you can enlighten us there, why certain people misunderstood the ancient teachings. Was it just that they were ignorant and they came up on it and then took it for truth as because they did not have the instruction which would have given them the understanding of what the myth really represented? They didn't have wise men. They killed the wise men. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Let me jump in.
Okay.
One of the mistakes I think that we Black people make is we underestimate the cleverness of Judaism. And let me explain what I mean by that. Judaism, okay, the historical facts are there, but the political program that the historical facts have is there. You see, Judaism as a religion is a self-help, nationalistic religion enabling people to survive, presumably in the Middle East, against their enemies by providing a code that if you follow the code, you are able to successfully fight and battle your enemies. And that's really what it's about. It's not, you see, a lot of us will look at it and we'll say, compared to what the ancient Egyptians taught, it's a naive misunderstanding. And on a spiritual level, it may well be. But from a political level, you have essentially one of the most powerful self-help group identity building programs that have ever been put together. Because ultimately, if you follow the ideas within it, you can't eat from somebody else's table because that's not allowed. Consequently, you can never be poisoned by somebody else. You have a code of hygiene, which is strict, it's harsh, but if you follow it, you live longer than if you didn't follow it. Do you see? You have every time it says, and God said, yeah, that's considered to be a mitzvah, a commandment. If you follow those commandments, you have license to fight your enemies. You have license to fight your enemies to the death. And that fighting your enemies to the death means that you can survive in a hostile environment. And ultimately, this is why Judaism is still around today as a religion, despite the fact they copied a whole bunch of stuff from other people's religions. Do you see? So from the perspective of what's true and what's false, we can certainly find that there's a lot of holes in the history of how they present their thing. But the political program of being able to stand up to what they would consider to be their enemies and ultimately survive, ultimately thrive, and ultimately grow, that's Judaism 101.
Well, when you put it that way, I think it's not different from Christianity 101 and perhaps Islam 101.
Amen.
Because if you look at what happened to Christianity, particularly, I guess, after the Council of Nicaea and the Romans took it over, it was a way of control and a hierarchical system that if you follow the system, well, you would have entrance to heaven. And whatever happened in heaven, it would be wonderful and so on and so forth. But,
Yeah.
you have to pay a price while you're here on earth. But certainly the priests and the hierarchy could absolve you of sins, etc., etc. All you had to do was follow what they said. And like you said, their commandments and their rituals and their observances and things that you can do on Friday and types of food that you can eat, and Friday is fish day or whatever it is, and and your prayers and so on and so forth. So it becomes a control system. And maybe what you're saying is that all religion is like that. Religion, when it gets away from its spirituality and its origins, becomes something very controlling, representing a particular cultural experience and the propagation of that culture.
And also in the hands of nationalists who are following it because they are nationalists. It enables them to fight their enemies and survive surrounded by their enemies. Do you see? And this is one of the lessons that to a certain extent your father was teaching about how we should be approaching our religion. So in other words, a lot of Black scholars, we talk about the rightness or wrongness of the facts, the rightness or wrongness of the spirituality and what the lessons originally meant. But in the hands of other people, they've been able to turn essentially our ideas into weapons of war and weapons of power.
If you look at it sort of from the modern perspective, with sort of retrospectroscope, we like to say that history is the lens through which we look at the future. But maybe history is also the lens through which we look at the past, to really gain an understanding of the past. And I think we can see, we can trace back the original spiritual ideas that were the basis of all of these religions. But they have been shaped by the historical and cultural experience of different people who have manipulated the original spirituality in lots of different ways, largely not only to benefit themselves, but for them to survive, even in hostile environments. And then also to allow them to conquer other people who do not accept their beliefs and are therefore heathens or are therefore the enemy. So religion has been used as a weapon of survival and a weapon of destruction of other people, and shall we say, taking over their space. If we look at that whole business of the slave trade and colonialism, certainly in terms of Europe, this is exactly what happened. I mean, the armies went in first and killed certain people, and then the priests went in next, or the ministers, what have you, change the religious basis of the people, so that they were disconnected from their religious system, which would have been their survival kit, as you kind of called it. I
Yeah.
think what we were saying. Your
Yeah.
religion is your survival kit in terms of your culture and your self-expression and how you interact with different groups, tribes, or nations, or what have you. Now, when survival kit is taken away, you're at the mercy of these new people who are coming in, and they're not giving you a survival kit. They're telling you to come in under their tents. So now you have no way to combat them, because your survival kit is lost, and you've become caught up into their way of living and their gods and their religion and their way to exist in the world. And you're like, it's like you no longer exist.
And let me throw in something else, sir. And then what then happens as well is what happens when you can use certain ideas from the Tanakh against other people specifically. So let me give you an example. When the commandment, the mitzvah, thou shalt have no other gods but me, that's, if you like, the belief of God's talking to the Israelite people or the Jewish people, Hebrew people, whatever. Does that make sense? Now, if we change the context, so it now becomes God talking to everybody, that now means if you don't worship the same God that's in the Tanakh, you are now committing sin, and I now have the right to convert you or kill you or label you a pagan, label you a heathen. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And so once that is, you can be labeled a pagan, Arabic version of it, kafir. Mm-hmm. They can now kill you, enslave you, and so on, so on, so forth. And even though you didn't consent to the "thou shalt have no other gods but me," you weren't asked, you know. Do you see? And so something that was, if you like, between God and the Jewish people now becomes between God and everybody, and that everybody says that there's only one right way to do it, a million wrong ways to do it. And if you're part of that million wrong ways to do it, then you can be converted, killed, or enslaved.
Greetings. I'm Robin Walker of The Black Secret. Keen to popularize Pan-African heritage, we have two products that should interest you. We are giving away an introductory free book called 100 Black History Facts. Click here to claim your free book. Secondly, our online course, The Black Secret, has 55 hours of filmed content. You will systematically learn every major theme in our history, going all the way back. Click here for more information.
And that's the reason why the commandments, certainly the Christian version of it, the 10 Commandments, the Jewish version 613, that's the reason why they've always held on to that, because they can use it as a weapon. And that's why being able to call people a pagan, a heathen, or a kafir is such a powerful thing, because now your liberty's on the line once they've called you that.
And you know, interesting. In some sense, in terms of, you know, how we're discussing it now, and your perspective is very interesting, in that religion really becomes a weapon, as we mentioned, something of a survival kit initially, but certainly as a way to maneuver in the world and to shape the world in terms of your own perspective. So that you're always, shall we say, dominant, whether it's by virtue of conversion or liquidation or any other means. I'm kind of wondering, you know, if we look at Christianity, because in some sense, Christianity came out of Judaism. And in some sense, I think both Judaism and Christianity came out of the same source, which is Egyptian Kemetic spirituality in terms of their understanding. And going back to the Essenes, because I think they were perhaps a Jewish sect, but the Gnostic groups, which I think was carrying on the Kemetic tradition, and then there was the Orthodox side of it, which was the religious or the Jewish side, and there was this more pure spiritual side, which are the Essenes, I guess, Essenes, however it's pronounced. And out of this came sort of the story of Jesus, or that's one a way in which it's thought of, that Jesus may have been a Gnostic, because I think a book of Jesus has been found, or Gospel of Jesus has been found. I don't know if you're, sort of the Gospel of Thomas, but in there's a lot of sayings of Jesus. And it's considered that this Jesus now was a Gnostic, part of the Essenes group, and that they were a Jewish group, which again would be sort of the Exodus, if you will, into Palestine, from Egypt. And then you have that becoming distorted over time, and again dealing perhaps with the Nicene Creed, and then the rewriting of so much of early Christianity in terms of the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, how they were reinterpreted in terms of telling the story. Because if you look at so much of it, and you know the work of Charles Finch, and you can probably go over that so much of it points to the story of Jesus as the Christ being Horus, which is the Egyptian deity, and this is probably what the Essenes were expressing in terms of their understanding of their own spirituality. And then they would have the sayings of Jesus would be similar to the sayings of Horus, which we have also in the hieroglyphics that have come down to us. And then, of course, this then gets distorted because it became spiritual. There was a spiritual aspect of, shall we say, the Jewish religion, if you will, that aspect of it, because they were against the Pharisees during that period of time, trying to reorganize Jewish religion away from the orthodoxy and the ritual that it had become, and wanting it to be more of a spiritual thing. And this aspect of it then, shall we say, became the basis of Christianity. But then this was also subverted later on, by the Romans.
Yeah, well said, sir. Essentially, the problem that early Christianity had is that not enough was known about the Jesus figure. If he existed, if you were to put all the known facts, if I can use the word known in inverted commas, there isn't really that much to go on. I think the main theory is that his ministry lasted 3.5 years or something like that. You can correct me. And so there isn't much that to go on. And when we look at his mystical birth, it looks just like the mystical birth of Horus and many of the other deities where, the Immaculate Conception, him disappearing into the temple age 12, coming out the age of 30. A lot of it is looking just like these types of traditions. And what's more, did you know that Dr. Martin Luther King also pointed this out?
No, I didn't. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
He was aware of this in terms of the source of Christianity. Mm.
Yeah, Dr. King was obviously a Bible scholar,
Yes.
and during his student years, he wrote a paper where he's describing essentially the mystical religions during the time of allegedly Jesus, such as the Mithraic one, the Egyptian one. And he says that in all the major essentials, these mystical religions were actually very, very similar to each other. And essentially, it was Christianity was the one that blew up, but any of the others could have blown up too. So there is a student article by Dr. King, and I do actually quote that student article in my book. I did a book called Blacks and Religion, Volume 2, where I quote Dr. King, of all people, are pointing this out. So here's the thing, here's the thing. Because there is so little historic fact about Jesus, you cannot actually build a religion on just the teachings of Jesus. Why? Because did he get married? Because there's a big question mark over whether he did or not. How are men supposed to relate to women?
Mm-hmm.
The Christians don't have an answer.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to all the other aspects of life, the Christians don't actually have an answer. So a lot of Christianity then had to be shaped by St. Paul, and a lot of Christianity had to be shaped by the Tanakh, which is now being called the Old Testament. That's why they held on to the Old Testament, because in the hands of the Roman Empire, they could use the commandments to mash up everybody else's religion by being able to call them pagans and heathens. Thou shalt have no other gods but me. You see, if you're taking the teachings as attributed to Jesus, you couldn't come to that conclusion.
Mm.
By himself, he was a man of peace and righteousness.
Mm.
But you can't build a religion just around that. Do you see? That's why they had to keep the Old Testament, so that they could keep the muscularity and use that muscularity against their enemies. And consequently, they now have religious justification to fight their enemies. And that's why you would hold on to the Old Testament. And then a lot of the other aspects of family building and so on had to come from St. Paul. And St. Paul, I gather, was Egyptian.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. And also there's a passage where somebody else refers to St. Paul and refers to him as that Egyptian.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah. I know that I know that he was how should I put it, a spiritual person, in that he shaped a lot of Christianity with his epistles to the Corinthians and the Galatians and so on and so forth. And of course, he didn't know Jesus by his own admission. He only knew Jesus through a mystical experience. Yeah. And this was his relationship then with Christianity. I think he was on the road to Damascus, if I remember my Sunday school stuff, which I haven't revisited, that he had this experience of meeting this mystical Christ. So he was expressing a mystical Christus. Yeah. Which is what the original Egyptian understanding was, the Karas, the anointed, who is Heru, who was resurrected his father, which is the spiritual essence or his soul. So I've always looked at Paul from that perspective, that he was a Christian in that sense, more so than these other folks who was taking Jesus as a historical person. He saw Jesus as a mystical person, entity. Therefore, he was always trying to express this mystical persona through himself, which was the original understanding or teaching, that the Christ was, each of us had to be this Christ, which was the perfection of ourselves. And then, of course, you go back to that whole scene the weighing of the heart against the feather, and the whole concept of ma'at and before the 42 gods in Ausar's chamber, and Heru sitting on his throne, etc., etc. Which is the Egyptian, version of somebody who has lived that spiritual life fully, and therefore can approach, shall we say, the other side. At the time of physical death, he can approach the other side and say, I have not done this, I have not done that, I have not done that, and so on and so forth. And my conscience is clear, the conscience being the heart, and it's being weighed against the feather. I mean, that's such a beautiful, concept that
and that's the thing, you see, and that's the thing. If Christianity had stayed like that, it could have been a very, very beautiful religion. But because it's in the hands of the Roman Empire trying to expand its power, it became a tool of oppression, it became a tool of violence, and as such a tool, it is responsible for the deaths of so many more people than almost any ideology that had ever come into being. Because what happened was they were able to use the Old Testament against its enemies. You've got to remember, people talk about the Roman Empire as if everybody was a Christian. You've got to remember the state religion was the worship of you've got the various deities associated with the planets, the likes of
Julius and those people.
Yeah.
Saturn and whatnot.
And so you've got to remember, all of that had to be wiped out. Then you had the elites in the Roman Empire worshipping Mithra. That had to be wiped out. And the result being that essentially a huge amount of forced conversions, and then with it, a huge amount of death, took place all the way across the Roman Empire. And then, of course, you've got to remember, the Romans conquered North Africa. Yeah. And they were therefore doing that to us as well. Do you see? And how they could justify that is by adding to, if you like, the beautiful side of what was in Christianity to the muscular and, can I say, violent side of what, and they were able to put the two together.
In terms of Islam, which again is sort of grafted on top of Christianity, and I guess it's part of that whole Judeo-Christian thing, because it goes back to Esau and Jacob and Isaac, and I'm sure you know the story. Was it Ishmael is a cousin of Jacob, or whatever it is. But they're related, so to speak, meaning that the Jewish tribe and the Arabic tribe are related in terms of the religion. But the Arabic side, I think, recognizes Jesus as a prophet in terms of their religion. But the rest of it, I don't know enough about it to really comment. Apart from the fact that, again, it's a monotheistic religion, and it's grafted onto both Christianity and Judaism. Although there's an aspect of it that I think that is purely mystical, and I think the Sufis, yes, and this harks back, I think, to the original Kemetic spirituality. Just like we were talking about the Pauline Christianity, if you will, and the Essenes, that also harks back to the original Kemetic spirituality. But I'm not sure that that's that popular within the Islamic culture. I met some of it in Turkey when I was there, just sort of vacationing with a group of people, and I found it very, very, very beautiful. The Sufis
Can I
are
jump in, sir?
beautiful people. Yeah,
Can I jump in, sir?
yeah, please.
Yeah, the founder of mystical Islam or Sufism was actually an African.
Wow.
Yeah, his name was Zu-ul-Nun, and he is said to have been born on the Egypto-Nubian border.
Say the name again.
Zu, Z-H-U, L''N-U-N, Zu-Nun.
Wow, I've never heard of that before. Beautiful. Thank you.
People like Rashidi have this information, and I've checked it, it's real. He is specifically described as light-skinned, so he wasn't, he certainly wasn't chocolate. I think African Americans would use the term high yellow specifically because the documents do say that. But he's born on the Egypto-Nubian border, and he is the beginnings of the 8th or 9th century, I can't remember which. And mystical Islam is traced to him. And places in West Africa like Timbuktu and so on, Sufism was extremely popular there. And so when it comes to the origins of Sufi Islam, we can claim it. We can claim it. And certainly, as you say, the beauty involved in that religion and so on, it's a big thing. It's a big thing.
Yeah, I think Rumi is part of that, isn't he? R-U-M-I is one of the
but I don't know which ethnicity he was.
No, I don't think he's African, but I mean, he was a Sufi in that sense. He was one of the mystic Islamists, if you will. You can call him that, yes, because there's a lot of writing about him, and these Sufis that I met with, a lot was about Ibn Arabi and Rumi and so on. Those were their mystical teachings, or their teachers. Ibn Arabi particularly, I think he was more recent than Rumi.
Yeah.
But it's good to know that there's that aspect of Islam, because again, you think so much of the warrior aspect of Islam in terms of its conquest of Egypt in the 7th century, and then all across North Africa and into Europe, and then you're coming down to the present time, and all this stuff about jihad and whatnot. It gives you a very negative view of Islam per se. So it's good to know that side of Islam, as well as the side of Christianity that we were also talking about. And some of that aspect needs to be emphasized, in terms of the present day, because I'm sure, you feel the same way. That obviously, there's only one God, whatever name that you choose to call God by, Olodumare or Allah or whatever. We're still just talking about one God, which is the source of all life. God is life and its manifestations. So, all of the religions, what are they saying? They're just people trying to understand themselves in the light of, understanding where they came from. So it should not be divisive, but unfortunately, it's extremely divisive. There should really be one.
Can I jump in there, sir?
Religion. Yeah, go ahead.
And the reason why it's divisive is because religion being more than just a spirituality, the fact that it comes with a political program as well, the fact that it comes with a political program where people are fighting over resources, the fact that it comes in a situation where you can give divine blessing to take another person's life, that's where the religions become problematic, because you can now justify beating somebody else up. you can now justify mistreating people. And that's where they become basically tools of violence, tools of oppression, and so on. And so when it comes to how we can look at religion, we have to understand that our ancient ancestors came up with very, very brilliant and very, very deep spiritual ideas. But in the hands of others, they've been able to mix it with a political program. And that political program does mean that they are allowed to do evil and still stay within their religion.
Greetings, I'm Robin Walker of The Black Secret. Keen to popularize Pan-African heritage, we have two products that should interest you. We are giving away an introductory free book called 100 Black History Facts. Click here to claim your free book. Secondly, our online course, The Black Secret, has 55 hours of filmed content. You will systematically learn every major theme in our history, going all the way back. Click here for more information.
And that's a very horrible fact that a lot of us have to get with and have to know, because a lot of us don't want to face that.
For a moment, looking at the trajectory that Western so-called civilization has taken, I think there was a fight, as you know, going through the Middle Ages and coming out on the other side of the Middle Ages, coming out into the 16th and 17th century, when the secular won out over the sacred. Meaning, but post-Enlightenment people saw the illogic of so many religious ideas and rituals, meaning that they saw that the earth wasn't flat, and the earth wasn't the center of the universe. It revolved around the sun. The scientists were proving these things to the religious and to the man in the street, so to speak. So religion, in that sense, lost its perch, and materialism as an aspect of science gained ground, and religion was moved, as you know, to the weekends, if that, and became more as something socially acceptable that you did, rather than anything that you had a deep belief in, and affected your behavior. It didn't affect your behavior at all, from Monday to Friday. And you did a few things on the weekend that made you feel good or right with your God, so to speak. So scientific materialism took over, but religion sold itself, in the Western sense, to become the handmaiden of scientific materialism, and hence exploitative capitalism. So then the two went together, because scientific materialism and the secular aspect of society allowed religion its space. And its ability to gain power and money relative to its own belief systems, so they could live together in harmony, as opposed to having war and then either religious winning or the secular winning. No, they made peace with each other, which was very, very smart in terms of then being able to conquer the world. So that the papacy, et cetera, as you know, blessed the ships that were transporting, the enslaved people, kidnapped enslaved people from Africa, to the New World, and the bishops in the New World were saying, bring those Africans here. I mean, they're strong and they can work. We've worn out the Native Americans. They're dying out from disease and overwork. So you had that wedding of religion and capital, if you will, or the industrial complex, if you will, And that's where we are today. That conquered the world, that conquered Africa, and it conquered the world. And the question which we have to get to at some point in time then is how do you disengage, shall we say, this beautiful spirituality, which was the origin. And you have to disengage it from religion on the one hand, and then you have to disengage it from the secular way of life, which is exploitative, and in terms of using other people's labor to enrich oneself, in terms of a class system and an elite system owning, the productive capacity and not sharing the wealth in terms of any form of distribution. How do you disengage one from the other and come up with a pure spirituality, if you will, that can manifest itself in a better way of life, meaning a way of life where we can see each other not as enemies or as competition, but as brothers and sisters, and create a society where wealth is shared and there's care, for each other. For want of a whole lot of words, loving kindness and compassion in terms of a society, then that shall we say, promotes the human being in terms of their full potential. This is a huge work that needs to be done, because this is the only way that Africa, I think, can be salvaged. Because now I don't know that I have accurate numbers per se, but I would say most of Africa, in terms of religion, worships, one of the either Christianity or Islam. I don't think there's that much Judaism per se, but there is some of that as well, or Hebrewism, if you will. Probably more than 80% of the population. Although at the same time, many of them also still have traditional religions in terms of their day-to-day experiences, and many graft one with the other, because we've certainly seen that in the diaspora, that the original religions of Africa have been grafted onto Christianity, shall we say, and have transformed Christianity into an African type of Christianity. So a lot of work has to be done in that area for Africans to reclaim an identity, which the identity was theirs to begin with.
Absolutely. And you're right, certainly we need to have that discussion. And another area I think we need to get into is the specifics of the history of Judaism in Africa, specifically, if you wanted to go there. Christianity in Africa. I'm not talking about religions brought, the time periods where it was brought in by colonizers. I'm talking about indigenous contributions to it, and with Islam too, indigenous contributions to it, because it's not all a history of aliens coming in with weapons and slavery. There's other stories that need to be told as well, because there is an idea that many people have that the monotheistic religions are white man's religions or Arab man religions or Semitic people's religions. And while these people had a hand in it, so did we. And that needs to be recognized as well.
I think that's important. And I think, along with that, we have to look at religion in Africa. And by that, I mean the traditional religions, as well as what you're saying, these modifications of religions that may have originated outside or originated inside, were transformed outside and then came back inside. I think all of those intricacies need to be known, because we have to look at religion, with the same way in which the scientist uses a microscope or a telescope. We have to be scientists of religion, because really what it's all about is being scientists about our own humanity, especially the side of our humanity that's not manifested physically, what is the source of a physical manifestation, which is spiritual. And as African people, we've always known that we're spiritual as well as physical. We're spiritual people having a physical experience in terms of birth, etc. So we have to look at our religions and from that perspective to really, understand what has happened over time, because much of what we know and we talk about historically is secular history, but I think now we need to get into, shall we say, religious history and see how an original spirituality was transformed, both in terms of the monotheistic religions as well as in terms of its propagation across the continent of Africa. So I look forward to those discussions coming up. So once again, thanks, Robin. It's been fun and always a learning experience for me. So continue with the good work.